Hey fam, welcome to Life More Abundantly, the podcast where we talk Black health like we talk everything else, real, out loud, and with love. I'm Dr. Eboni Haynes.
And I'm Dr. Tynisha Drennon.
And we've got a lot to talk about today, so let's get into today's episode.
Let's go.
All right, T. So I'm sure you have heard, and all of our listeners have heard about the Supreme Court decision that was rendered last week. So I figured we'd talk about that a little bit so that our listeners can get a sense of what the big deal really is.
Absolutely, especially during this voting season, why it's so important.
For sure. So the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision that many people see as a further weakening of the Voting Rights Act. And several experts warn that it could lead to the largest ever drop in Black representation in Congress because it really opens the door for new redistricting fights. So what happened? In a nutshell, the Supreme Court's conservative majority interpreted Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, the part that protects against racial discrimination in voting. And after the ruling, the Republicans, and you really hate to indicate the justices' political positions because really
They're
the
supposed to be
Supreme Court,
bipartisan.
exactly, they're supposed to be bipartisan. But here in the last, I would say probably in the last 5 to 7 years, we have seen increasingly where people are highlighting the political party that placed them on the court, right?
Right.
So after the court ruled, then Republicans started calling for new rounds of congressional map drawing. And it has really already started. And so the timing for all of this redistricting is unclear, but it's clear that there will be a big impact long-term beyond this November.
Which is crazy because, of course, we know who the majority leaders are in this administration, and they always seem to have an ulterior motive. I think it's at an interesting time when we are seeing, and it's still not the majority, but I feel like the largest number of people of color in politics. And so now here we are trying to redistrict it to say what? That we won't be represented in the same fashion.
Yeah, I recall reading that Sherilyn Ifill mentioned that in the 1970s, we only had 1,500 Black elected officials, and now we have over 10,000. So this really is going to make a difference in terms of who represents us. Sure, right now we're talking about in Congress, but this has greater implications for the Black community in other races as well.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. The first thing that comes to my mind, of course, is the whole, in my opinion, Jasmine Crockett debacle in Texas, where she really lost, seemingly by the hair of her chin because of these redistricting at the last minute type of scenarios. And I heard her give an interview yesterday, and she talked about being the 51st elected Black woman to Congress. And she's like, it's a lot, but it's not a lot. It should be way more at this juncture in our country's history. And so now here we are specifically talking about a case in Louisiana where the decision from the Supreme Court references Louisiana versus Calais, who is quoted by the Congressional Black Caucus chair, saying that Louisiana district created to comply with Section 2 was unconstitutional racial gerrymander. Let's talk about gerrymander for a second, because I think a lot of people don't really understand what is that. Give us a little insight.
So what's so interesting about this whole thing is that I actually have an uncle who ended up filing a lawsuit against the county where he lived because of this attempt to gerrymander. The lines were drawn such that it would advantage the white individuals in the county in terms of elections. And so gerrymandering is pretty much the manipulation of the boundaries, the electoral boundaries, so that it favors one party or class of people. For our listeners, your community is probably broken up into districts. You live in a particular district, but the people who may live about 5 miles from you, they might live in a different district. People
Right.
who live south of you might be in a different district, but you will have all of these different districts in one county. And so if you redraw the lines, maybe those new districts are more representative of people who vote a certain way, right? They might be more
Right.
conservative or more Democrat. And so the whole idea of preventing gerrymandering is to make sure that when these lines are drawn, that they are representative of the communities that are voting.
That are voting, because my
Mhm.
understanding, it's like the politicians picking who votes for them instead of the
Right.
voters picking the politicians, which is the whole
Correct.
purpose of voting.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, yeah, so it's funny because the Supreme Court just ruled a few years ago that the congressional districts that had been drawn to make sure that there was more equitable representation of minority groups was constitutional. Now they're reversing course on this, basically, with this
Mm,
Louisiana decision.
mhm. Got
And
you.
so the other piece of this that I think is really interesting is the fact that this particular Louisiana district in question is represented by Representative Cleo Fields. And this is something that Cleo Fields has been through before. So
Wow.
like 33 years ago, I think it was, like Cleo Fields went through the same thing where the district was redrawn. And I do feel like it was politically motivated then. I think it's politically motivated now. So we'll see what happens. We don't know the timing of this redistricting, but for sure it will happen, especially now that it's gone to the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land.
It's interesting because Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, talked about how the Supreme Court, paraphrasing, of course, for lack of a better way to say its time is basically wasted in making decisions that shouldn't be in the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that this shouldn't be going to the Supreme Court, but I think that once again, the people who live in these districts should be able to make these types of decisions. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know that it's necessarily beneficial to have someone who's not living in the county, living in the district, even living in the state, making a decision on what's best for these people, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
talking about potentially 15 House districts from Louisiana east to North Carolina could be completely eliminated. So this
Mm-hmm.
isn't really even redistricting. This is elimination. And
Mm-hmm.
how do you say those people who pay tax dollars don't have a right to vote on who's going to represent them in DC?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's expected that because of this ruling, there will be the largest ever decline in Black members of Congress, potentially breaking a record set around the end of Reconstruction. And that would have been around 1877. So everyone should care about this issue.
Everybody should care about this, right? Because if you think it's not gonna happen in your state, like, just as my great-grandmother would say, "Just keep living,"
Just keep
right?
living.
So, you have to be supportive when this happens anywhere because then it sets the precedence that it can happen everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's crazy that since the Voting Rights Act passed in 1965, the number of Black represented House districts grew to 63%, which is about 14% of the House. And you
Mm-hmm.
talked about that. And then it seems like Black represented districts were in single digits or zero for a century after the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
So these protections are not just symbolic, they shape actually who wins and who represents us, which goes
Mm-hmm.
back to when people say, oh, I don't need to vote. It doesn't matter. It does matter. And this is why you also have to be involved, not just cast
Right.
your vote. You have to be involved. You have to show up when these meetings are taking place. You have to do your due diligence to find out when these conversations are taking place because the oppressor never invites the oppressed to the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some people maybe thought about this Voting Rights Act as no big deal. They haven't been paying attention to it, particularly in Black and Brown communities. However, Think about it like this. One of the tenets of the Voting Rights Act was to make sure that there would be federal oversight over elections within the state because there
Mhm.
was known discrimination happening
Right.
in states. There was, situations where individuals were turned away from the polls
Mhm.
for just
Still
stupid reasons, right?
right.
Like you can't read, you can't
Yeah.
afford to pay the tax that we charge you to vote in
Mhm.
elections, right? And other overt as well as subversive means of keeping Black and brown people from the ballot box.
Right.
And so now what you're seeing is not just, the federal oversight being completely dissolved, right?
Yep.
Not that we want this administration overseeing elections anyway, but you also now see that these politicians, whoever is in the majority, being able to dictate how the congressional districts are drawn so that they can assure themselves of
Mhm.
putting the person that they want into office. That should be upsetting to everybody.
In the past, when I've looked at even campaigning, right, it often seems like the person with the most money, which is why they're
Mhm.
always fundraising, is the
Right.
person who wins, which
Yep.
always has made me uncomfortable because if it's about, my interests and me casting my vote, why does it matter who has the most money? Why is that
Mhm.
person ahead in the polls? And so this is in the same context, like you're stacking the voters and you're saying, it doesn't really matter, and of course it matters.
Of
Of
course it
course it
matters.
matters, and if all of those things that you brought up, including this, are reasons why we deter people from going to the voting polls or we don't want them represented, then stop taking our tax dollars and stop
Hello.
making it mandatory.
Yeah.
Stop making it mandatory that we pay property tax, that we
Mhm.
pay school tax, that we pay, just everything, even sales tax. If
Mhm.
my voice doesn't matter, then stop taking my dollars.
Yeah, I agree. And representation really does touch on every aspect of our lives. And so if you don't have people in Congress who are representing you, who understand your challenges, then
Mhm,
you're not going to have policies that address disparities in healthcare access, disparities in
mhm,
maternal health, disparities in housing access,
mhm,
school funding.
mhm,
We're not going to have people who are talking about the specific environmental protections that our
mhm,
communities need,
mhm.
right? We're not going to see criminal justice reform, all of those things. And, there's so many
Education
things.
allocation.
Absolutely. All of it matters. But when you have individuals representing you who don't have any of the lived experience that you have, who are
Mhm,
not connected to these communities, they don't know what to ask for. And usually they're
right.
not going to care that you
Yeah.
need that. They're going to look out for theirs. And so we have to be vigilant. So you see this happening. It's not even covert now. It is straight overt
Right.
what they're doing. And so you see it. And so what are you going to do about it? Are you going to stay at home now on election day or are you going to get
Mhm,
out? Are you going to mobilize? Are you going to raise hell? Because that's what it's
mhm.
going to take in order for us to stand against and rally against and fight against what we see happening.
Right. And they're making it in this cute little term called gerrymandering, but the reality of it is bullyism. You're being
Mm,
bullies. You're
mm-hmm,
being bullies because you also know that the people, it's not even just that maybe I don't care or I don't know. It's also I don't have the emotional, physical energy and
mm-hmm,
time because I got to take my black behind to work to feed
mm-hmm.
these kids and now you want me to take time off work, stop feeding my kids, stop going up to the school to come down here and fight so that I can vote. I
Right.
mean, it's just, it hits all barriers because the people who are able to show up are often the people who don't need to show up.
Yeah, that's true. But if we care about democracy, we're going to have to make some adjustments
Yeah.
and do what we can, but we need to be united when we do it, period, point blank.
Mhm.
Yeah. So this isn't just a court story. It really is about power.
Yeah.
And we need to recognize that power shapes our lives, power shapes our health, power shapes the resources we have, and ultimately power determines what kind of future we'll have. So we'll definitely keep you all posted as any additional news comes out that, affects our lives on a day-to-day basis like this one. So just be vigilant and stay the course.
Absolutely. And try and stay as informed as possible.
So in other news, let's go from Louisiana to South Carolina.
Child, the South is acting up right now.
Ooh, child, the South is trying to rise again.
Right.
So, if you weren't aware of it, we have some news from South Carolina State University. There was an invitation that went out to the state's Lieutenant Governor, Pamela Yvette, and they had requested that she serve as the commencement speaker. I don't understand this at all. Well, I do and I
Right.
don't. So,
Well,
for those of you who are not aware, South Carolina State University, as the name implies, is a state school. And
it's an HBCU,
it is
but
an
it's funded
HBCU,
by the state.
but it's funded by the state. And this is one of those schools where the state is very hands-on, but the state is also a Republican-led state. And so they have a lot more dealings with South Carolina State's day-to-day business than I think they should. But anyway, that's my own personal opinion. So anyway, it was planned that this lieutenant governor was going to be the commencement speaker
We don't know
for
who
South
planned
Carolina.
it. Maybe they were AKA. Yes, you were.
So the students at South Carolina State said, nah, we ain't having that. And so they protested, they formed a sit-in, and 24 hours after the students erupted in protest, the decision was made to rescind the invitation to her to serve.
Yeah. So good job to the students of South Carolina State. It was
Yes.
a very peaceful protest. I saw on social media, like, in what hour did the fight break out? None of that happened.
None
Nobody
of
was
that.
arrested. Thank God, thank God, thank God. But they wasn't there against each other. They were there
Mm-hmm.
unified for a purpose,
Mm-hmm.
which reminds me of, true civil rights activism where the community came together, which is what we were just talking about, on a
Mm-hmm.
unified issue and peacefully protested. And so the media, black and white, would make us think that we cannot do that peacefully, but that is what our civil rights history is rooted in. It was students who did the sit-ins and all of the types of things to make change. And so, in case you're not aware, because I wasn't initially either, Pamela Yvette is not just the lieutenant governor, but she's also running in the Republican primary for governor. So this moment is not just ceremonial, but it's very much political, which seems
Mm-hmm.
like everything is right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a commencement speaker is supposed to be about empowering the
Right.
people who are graduating. And she's publicly associated with anti-DEI,
Mm-hmm.
which is one of the primary reasons why the students ejected. Like, once again, you don't care about our votes. You don't care about
Right.
our interests.
That's
Why are
right.
you coming here to inspire minds to lead the future? You're not interested in us leading the future. You're interested
Mm-hmm.
in us staying in our place. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then on top of that, she had the nerve to go on social media and talk about that the event was canceled for credible safety threats. Nobody
girl,
was threatening
bye.
your life.
Listen. Eat your salad like the man at the. Go ahead.
Exactly. And then the other thing she had the nerve to put in her message, her post on X, formerly known as Twitter, was that we can't give up the fight to end indoctrination and DEI on campuses once and for all. Number one, she never should have been invited, like you
Right.
mentioned. But the other piece of this is that it also signals that there is inherently a problem with protesting, right? And that there is something wrong with protesting individuals who are anti diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. But the interesting part of that, and I'm sure she is not even as well versed in South Carolina State's history, is the fact that, back in 1968, the Orangeburg Massacre happened, and South
Right,
Carolina
right.
State students led that effort. And many people think about the Orangeburg Massacre as the students getting killed by the highway patrolmen. But before the shootings happened, the students were actually arrested for sitting in at a segregated bowling alley. The students were, peacefully protesting segregation in their community. So anytime Black people are lifting their voices, fighting for things that should be a human right,
Mhm. Mhm.
the majority always pushes against it because, again, it's about power. I think the students at South Carolina State, they understand and they embrace that history of protesting. And they also know the power of protesting. And so they were like, no, we don't want that. We don't want her. So we're going to let our opinions be known. And the fact that as the lieutenant governor who's running for an office where she would represent everybody.
And these are voters.
Exactly, that she can't even get out of her conservatism to recognize these individuals wanting someone to represent them who cares about them and who cares about the specific issues that impact Black and Brown communities.
Definitely not on the same agenda. And she refers to them as, quote, a woke mob, end quote. So, mob, you take that for what it is. But like Cat Williams said, when did woke become a bad thing?
Right.
More people need to be woke. You need to be woke about what the issues are of the constituents and potential constituents are concerned about. You need to wake up and stop being so self-centered. And so, that is an ongoing issue that we definitely have with this current administration across the board, in this climate of politics, people just not being concerned about the totality of those voters, of the citizens of your state, your district, your county, of the country. And, I remember when President Barack Obama, during his administration, the Black community being often upset, saying he was not doing enough. And those of us who understand the world of politics even a little bit, including myself, kept reiterating, he's not just the president of Black America. He's the president of the United States.
That's right.
Why do we have to be aware that we're not just the leaders of Black people, but we're the leaders of everyone? That standard should be held to everyone who's in an elected office. Additionally, I think that it should be the student body who submits a list of names of who will be invited. I'm a graduate of the Interdenominational Theological Center, better known as the ITC, and may he rest in peace. Bishop Eddie Long was invited to be the commencement speaker the year I was graduating, and we had to protest. Unfortunately, the invitation was not rescinded, but part of the protest was that Eddie Long not only had dropped out of ITC, but was an avid criticizer of theological education. And so once again, we were saying this goes against all the years that we've spent earning this degree. And so as we are encouraging individuals to be critical thinkers, then we also ought to trust the student body enough to come together and have much influence in who is invited to their sending off into the world.
For sure. Yeah. And the other thing that this brought up for me as it relates to an HBCU is that HBCUs tend not to be as open to certain ideologies, certain individuals visiting campus like the predominantly white institutions are, right? So you're not going to see a Charlie Kirk-like individual on an HBCU campus because those individuals' ideologies do not align with the core values of any HBCU, right? Which was why the individuals who tried to set up tables on Tennessee State University's campus last year, right? That's why that was so problematic because it's like you don't represent the values that we espouse. And so we don't want that on our campuses. I love the fact that the students are using their voice to demand what it is that they want and what they need on their campuses. And I think it's a reminder to Black students or students at Black colleges everywhere that whole protest movement that we saw from back in the day, sitting in at Woolworth's counters, right? Segregated bowling alleys, that type of collective action is still important today.
Absolutely.
Still important, and we should still be encouraging our students to do it. Parents, I've heard parents say, I send my money and my kid to that school for them to get an education. They don't need to be engaged in this kind of stuff. And I would encourage you to rethink your position on that because your students are being developed into future leaders. And so do you want them to be future leaders that just sit back when gerrymandering happens in your community? Do you want them to sit back when funding for education is being cut? Do you want them to sit back when any other thing is happening to oppress our people.
Right.
And not say anything, because this is what you're cultivating in them, a passiveness that we can't afford, especially with this administration, and people like the folks in this administration. We can't afford for our young adults to be passive any longer.
I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying. The flip side of that is, as the lieutenant governor implied that there was a safety issue for her. When we do these type of protests, there is a safety issue for us.
For us.
And our
Yes.
children. And so part of it is rooted in fear. My children don't need to be involved in this because it's rooted in fear. It's rooted in, will they be arrested and become part of the criminal system? Will they be attacked? Beaten, gassed, all the hoses, will dogs be brought out? Will all of these things that are rooted in our history, the trauma that we have endured, not just then, but still now when people are protesting. And so I think it's also a traumatic response that we're concerned. We want our children to live to see another day, to to be able to advocate in these different arenas. And unfortunately, that's not always the case, which is a very sad, another disturbing fact in the history of this country. One of the things that, well, definitely our whole constituency or listenership is that our podcast focuses on health. And this is a mental health issue as well. I mean, you have not only probably the seniors protesting, but the rest of the student body, is also potential freshmen, incoming freshmen are viewing this or hearing this or, emotionally engaged in this. And this creates a heightened anxiety in our community. Look, we not even there. And we like, they all right down there, hypervigilance, sleep disruption, burnout, and who are already carrying the stressors. I can't even imagine what it's like, being a Black person. Well, wait, I live in Georgia. I was about to say being a Black person in the South. I'm originally from Philadelphia. These things happen. We be worried. We already carrying enough. I mean, to be Black in America is in of itself a stressor. To be an educated Black person navigating through an educational system is a stressor. And so I think, especially at HBCUs, that we should be trying to decrease the amount of stress that our people have. And so that's just a point to the president and the powers that be who are over colleges and universities when they make these types of decisions. Child, that was a lot. Got my blood pressure boiling already early in the morning.
Yeah, that was a lot. That was a lot. However, we send our kids to HBCUs for all sorts of reasons. And I think the main one is to make sure that our young people understand their history, but also that they're surrounded by people who look like them. And we're building them up to not only be strong enough to deal with the challenges of living in America as a Black person, but also to learn how to collectively respond to the needs of the Black community. So that's what our HBCUs are doing. And I appreciate that South Carolina State's administrators recognize that they need
listened.
to listen to Black students on campus.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think this is a perfect segue into what's up this week in Black History 365.
So, speaking of protests, May 11th, 1961, Freedom Riders began their trip through the South. So, during this time, the Freedom Riders were engaged in challenging segregation. Civil rights activists, both Black and white,
yes, we appreciate our allies.
That's right. Got on buses and traveled the interstates through the South to protest, to peacefully protest racial segregation. In addition to that, they were also enforcing Supreme Court rulings that banned segregation in interstate travel. They were really concerned about the direction that the country was going in, especially in the South, the overt disregard for Supreme Court rulings.
Right.
And they knew that they had the law on their sides, but that there was this gap between what the law said people in the South were supposed to be doing and what was actually happening on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a reminder that our civil rights have to be defended in real time. That
Mhm.
we've talked about before, that protest is also uncomfortable, right? It's
Yeah.
inconvenient. And so even though I'm lifting up the real fears and dangers and concerns, the reality of it is that we have to stand up for ourselves, and we do appreciate our allies, because even still in 2027, sometimes even though we're making the most noise, our voice is not heard till somebody who is an ally also steps
Mhm.
in and stands in the gap with us.
It's interesting that this is the story today because it reminds me of this time that I got pulled over by a state trooper in
Mm.
Alabama.
Oh,
It was in Anniston, Alabama. And it was a white state trooper pulled me over allegedly for speeding, although when he pulled me over, I actually was not speeding. Um, but anyway,
allegedly.
right.
No.
He pulls me over. I mean, I do have
You
a lead
wasn't
foot.
speeding,
I'm gonna
allegedly.
I will admit that, but I saw him getting on the interstate, and as soon as I saw him, I looked at my speedometer, and I wasn't speeding. Okay, I was
Gotcha.
going 7 over, but I mean, that's not enough
Right,
to
right.
just about pulling somebody over. So anyway, so he pulls me over, and he is very aggressive with me. I mean, I'm in a
Oh,
suit. I'm coming back from a training that I had done in Birmingham. And it's 10:30 at night, and he pulls me
wow.
over, and he's aggressive. I have my hands on my steering wheel, tending
Mm,
to, I'm like, calm. He asked me, if I knew why he pulled me over. I said no, because I wasn't really speeding.
right.
And so he was just like, yes, you were. And I was like, no, I wasn't. And he was like, I'm
Mm,
not going to argue with you.
mm,
And so, like, everything in me was like, just get home,
right.
don't escalate the situation. He was very aggressive. So eventually I just kind of looked away because I knew I was going to roll my eyes. I'm trying to
Mm.
keep my composure. And then he's like, see, that's what I'm talking about right there. You're being disrespectful, blah, blah, blah.
Sir, give me
And
my ticket and go home.
just keep it moving, sir. My sister was on my car Bluetooth because we were talking while I was driving.
Mhm.
And so she's listening to this whole situation. And it just got to a point where I broke. And I was just like, number one, I'm not disrespecting you just because I'm not looking directly at you because I'm trying to keep myself together, hold my composure because you're being aggressive doesn't mean I'm being disrespectful. And he was like, well, you just seem like you're agitated. Yeah, I am agitated. And let me tell you why. I said, I don't
Mm,
know if you know any of the significance of you being a white state trooper pulling me over at 10:30 at night and being
mhm.
aggressive. This is where there was a bus bombing during the Freedom Ride movement.
Wow.
And so, yeah, all of that is playing in my head right now.
Ooh,
Right. And for
the
you to come
ancestral
over,
trauma.
right. And so for you to come to my window and be so aggressive for no reason, I'm not giving you any reason to be aggressive. I am disturbed. I
Yeah.
am, concerned. I am you feeling all kinds of emotions. And then it just got to a point where it's like, well, Ebony, you said that. So you might as well just go on and give them a whole history lesson. Sir, do you know why I got my hands at 10 and 2? Do you know what we tell our black kids when they get pulled over by a police officer? Do you know the significance of being a white
Mm,
police officer in the South? Like all of this is important for you to
mm.
know. My husband was like, look,
Don't do that
don't
again.
ever
Right.
do that again. Like, I just need you to make it home. But when we talk about the historical trauma,
Yeah.
literally in that moment, all that I was thinking about was this freedom ride movement and this bus
Mm,
bombing and the attitudes of white people in
yeah.
Alabama, which still exists today. Let me tell
Yes.
you, having
Yes.
lived there, it still exists today. And so these conversations are not just Black history, they are
Right.
today history. And
Today
if we're
history.
not
Yeah.
informed about our history, then we are going to have a hard time really moving forward and teaching our young people how to navigate this very difficult world, especially here in the US.
It's very empowering for you to have known the history and to be able to explain that to this officer. And we're always teetering a fine line of self-advocacy. And as you said, just trying to make it home. We just want to make it
Mhm.
home safely. We want to make it home alive. All of those types of things. But I also think, especially culturally, the spirit realm is very
Mhm.
real for us. Even if I were pulled over in the same spot, I might not have been able to articulate what the history was, but in my spirit, I know the
Mhm.
history. If I'd been
Right.
pulled over in that spot, I could feel the power and the grief
Yes.
of ancestors. And so that, in addition to present day trauma, vicarious trauma, or, our own having lived, an experience that didn't turn out as well, it just takes its toll on us physically and mentally, as well as
Mhm.
emotionally and spiritually. And as you are alluding to, either they don't know, they pretend to know, or they don't care that that's the history. And
Mhm.
so when they approach us, all of that is on us. And yeah, we might be prone to snap, crackle, and pop off at the
Right.
mouth, right?
Right.
Or because there's the fight, there's the flee, there's the freeze,
Mhm.
right? And so it sounds like all of that was happening
Mhm.
simultaneously for you in that instance. And he just living his life doing whatever he wanna do, and we just don't have that privilege.
Right. Oblivious, oblivious. And to add
Mhm.
insult to injury, after he comes back to the window, he's like, well, can I tell you something? I'm not from Alabama. Okay, obviously, because you don't know this history of this region right here that you're in. I'm from New Jersey. And when I was in New Jersey, I was a member of a Black motorcycle club.
Sir,
So
we don't wanna hear that some of your
I,
best friends are
I'm
Black.
not trying I'm not trying to hear that. I'm not trying to hear
Right.
that. Because at the end of the day, if that was the case, and if you were truly part of some brotherhood, right, in this Black motorcycle club, then you never would approach anybody,
Mhm.
particularly a Black person, the way that
Mhm.
you did
Mhm.
when you are performing your work. So I don't give you any brownie points for that, because you've made the point that, yeah, you can be surrounded by Black people, but it hasn't changed you. You still are leaning into your whiteness. Yeah,
Like, Jesse said, "You want our rhythm, but you don't want our blues."
that's right.
So you just want some cool points for being around Black people, but you still are not sensitive to the power and authority that you hold, and how there's a power imbalance for anybody when a police officer walks up to your window, and being sensitive to that, but then culturally sensitive and aware as well.
Yeah.
So,
So, all right. Thank you for allowing me to rest on your therapy couch today.
sure, we like it.
All right. So, in other Black history news, on May 10th, 1994, Nelson Mandela was inaugurated as South Africa's first Black president. Nelson Mandela was an anti apartheid leader and global symbol of liberation.
Yes.
But that didn't come without a cost to him. He
Mhm.
actually spent 27 years in prison for his role in resisting apartheid.
Yes. When you led with this story, I started smiling because I think that for a continent and a country to be blackity black, 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 all in through, to be insisting on a democracy, and for
Mhm,
it to take till 1994 for a Black president. Once again,
mhm.
of course, we are overjoyed and all the things, but it's also very, very sad that
Right.
even on land that is inherently ours, we are
Yep.
still fighting the same injustices. Even right now, today
Yep.
in
Today.
2026 on the
That's right.
continent, it's still a problem.
That's right. Yeah. The colonization of the continent is something that, again, we should be concerned about as well. Yeah, we got lots of problems over here in the US.
Mhm.
And there was a point where there were people who were actively post emancipation engaged in the Back to Africa movement, right?
Right.
And yeah, we had a lot of individuals who moved back to Africa and continue to move back to Africa,
Mhm.
but the colonization of Africa is still such that even if we were to leave America and go
Right.
to the continent, whatever country you want to go to, there
Mhm.
is still going to be a need for us to fight. Right? To fight
Exactly.
to decolonize, to fight for equal rights, to fight for a reduction in the disparities that occur in
Mhm.
education and
Mm.
healthcare and all of that. Guess what? The fight is the same. It looks
Yes.
different, but at the
Yes.
end of the day, we're still fighting the same ideologies there as we
Absolutely.
are here.
Absolutely. And then, there was a time when white people were like, oh, if you don't like it here, go back to Africa. Well, y'all there too, because y'all
Right.
took over everything we had. And then we're going to go over there and have to fight the same
Right.
thing. And, also be looking at side eye from our brothers and sisters as like, what took you so long to come home?
Mm-hmm. Getting it
So,
from both sides.
yes, and so the issues are the same. But, Nelson Mandela's election does remind us that systems can change, but they
Mhm.
don't change without pressure. They don't change without organizing. They don't change without sacrifice. As we just said
Yeah.
earlier, we've said it before, that it is inconvenient,
Mhm.
but it is necessary, not just for ourselves, but for those who are coming behind us.
Yeah. And if you really think about it, apartheid then as well as now, because apartheid still does very much exist today. We may not call it apartheid, but it still
Absolutely.
very much exists today.
We call it gerrymandering. I'm
Right,
sorry. Go
exactly,
ahead.
exactly. But it also is a public health issue, right? So when you
Yes.
have apartheid, when you're segregating people who are, and especially if you've moved those individuals from their home locations to somewhere else where you think
Mhm.
they quote should be unquote, then we're talking about forced displacement. We're talking about people not having access to financial and other resources. So we're talking about
Right.
people living in poverty. We're talking about people
Yes.
exposed to violence or committing violence as a response to the trauma that they're dealing with or living in, right?
Mhm.
Restricted access to all kinds of care. Guess what?
Yeah,
That's not just in South Africa. That's not just on the continent of Africa. That's right here in the US where we experience
absolutely.
apartheid too. So we also have to start framing it, in my opinion, that way that these things are public health issues that have long term consequences for individuals. And
Yes.
so we have to think differently about how we address trauma, especially that generational trauma, how we
Mhm.
address chronic stress. And we talk
Mhm.
about that a lot on our podcast. And I think sometimes we do talk about it a lot because it is a lot, but it's something
Sure.
that we have to address collectively. It can't be just I'm going to do my thing over here, you're going to do your thing over there. We have to
Right.
address this as a community.
Totally agree. Yeah. We're gonna get into mental health in just a minute, but we've been talking about it. So, if y'all need to take a breather, go ahead and take you 3 deep breaths, inhale and exhale. We're gonna get through it together.
That's right. That's right. We are in this together. All right, T. Well, you teed it up. So, what's on our community calendar for today?
Well, every day we talk about Black mental health because this is all related, but today specifically we want to address children's mental health, which Children's Mental Health Awareness Day is on May 9th. And we want to talk about how kids think, feel, learn, behave, and cope. And then are they supported at home, school, and in the community, and what ways we can do that. I think it's important for us to talk about it because besides the talk, right, end quote, the talk is, you know, don't talk back, come
Hmm.
home safe. If you're stopped by the police, put your hands in the air. All those things are the talk that we used to have with Black boys, but now we got to have it with everybody
Hmm.
from when you leave the house. But there are some other things that come with mental health and how we can support our children, especially in the home.
Yeah. So about 1 in 10 kids aged 3 to 17 have been diagnosed with anxiety, and about 1 in 20 kids between 3 and 17 have been diagnosed with depression. But
Mm,
our Black kids deal with very different stressors, and so
yeah.
they have different outcomes when we think about mental health. When we think about suicide, for example, Black youth between the ages of 5 and 12 are about 2 times more likely to die by suicide than white kids of the same age.
Wow.
Yeah. And we're
Huh.
seeing that increasingly happening in this era, right? There was this time where it was rare to hear about Black kids
Exactly.
killing
That's what made
themselves.
it striking to me. Sure.
But yeah, not in today's time, especially now that families have greater access to firearms and they have those firearms in the home. But we also have to think about the fact that before a child gets to that point, there have been disparities in diagnosis, right? So
Absolutely.
Black kids are more likely than white kids to be first diagnosed with a major depressive disorder during a crisis event. So there are things that could happen that signal to a parent that they need to go have their child evaluated, but they don't do that. So there's a delay in diagnosis, and it doesn't happen until a kid has done something. They're in crisis. There's a crisis event, and that's when
Right.
they're getting diagnosed. Whereas for white kids, it's a bit different, right? So there are signs that something is going on, and for lots of reasons, primarily access. White kids tend to access healthcare. White kids tend to be diagnosed earlier so that everyone is informed about what's going on. They're not
Sure.
diagnosed during a crisis event.
And those diagnoses can include, because often I think that mental health, especially in children, especially in our Black children, is misunderstood as bad behavior
Right.
instead of unmet needs.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you'll see a child being angry or withdrawing or having these outbursts. And as you said, access to healthcare, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, we don't take our children to even the pediatrician as often. We don't utilize school counselors as
Mm-hmm.
often. And then because the school system is so overwhelmed with the student to teacher ratio in the classrooms, especially
Mm-hmm.
in urban areas, conditions like ADHD,
Yep.
anxiety, autism, these are underdiagnosed. And so our children are labeled with bad behavior
Mm-hmm.
instead of realizing that we're failing them.
Right.
We're failing them.
Yeah. And because Black kids are not being diagnosed, that also means that they're not getting the treatment that they need.
I also think that, speaking of the school system, obviously there's over disciplining versus
Mm-hmm.
underdiagnosing. Black boys and girls are often mislabeled rather than supported. There's a lack of culturally competent counselors and
Yeah.
teachers, which goes back to what we were saying even about the police force.
Mm-hmm.
People are not being culturally educated. I have a girlfriend who did her doctorate in cultural pedagogy, and it
Mm-hmm.
is so important. I work for a company where the most senior manager not a person of color. The entire program is for people of color, and she said, "I don't see race." Well, that's
Mm,
problematic on
it
many
is.
labels because it doesn't mean that you are not a racist or that you are a racist, but it means that you are not culturally aware of the
Right.
struggles that we go through on a day-to-day basis. And this is why, it's important to be a parent who can be involved in requesting an IEP or a 504 plan, advocating for a child, but also paying attention to our children. One of the things that we have culturally, Black and brown people, is the adultification
Mm-hmm.
of children.
Good point. That's
Right.
right.
So we put, now they don't let you do it, but when you and I were growing up, they called us latchkey kids because we
Mm-hmm.
had the key. We came home, we
Mm-hmm.
locked the door, we was told don't let nobody in.
That's
They
right.
had to take the meat out. We might have had to cook it. We
That's
might have had to
right.
take care of our younger siblings. We might have had to throw some clothes in the laundry. We better have
Mm-hmm.
swept, mop, whatever. And so because there's these adult characteristics placed on children, right?
Right.
We're seen as more mature
Mm-hmm.
than other children. And because of that, we also are underdiagnosed.
Mm-hmm. For sure. One of the books that I'm reading right now is called What Happened to You? So this is the book that Oprah
Mm.
Winfrey wrote with Dr. Bruce Perry. And when I tell you, it has been very eye-opening about how kids, number one, how their brains develop and the things that might happen that cause a mislabeling of young people as having a mental health diagnosis, like you were mentioning a few moments ago. But then also how, as children, as babies and toddlers and young children, how they interpret the world around them. And
Mhm.
at the time when they're interpreting the world around them, how
Yeah,
that gets kind of branded in their mind about how the world is ordered and the things that should be happening.
hmm
And it also then dictates how they respond to trauma. And
sure.
so I highly recommend that everyone read this book because it's not just good for people who have children, but it's also good for individuals so that they can go back and reevaluate their own personal
hmm
histories, childhood histories, and say, oh, now I understand why, right?
Gotcha.
But the other thing that this book calls out is the mislabeling of behaviors
Mm.
as mental health disorders,
Right.
when in fact is really just a trauma response.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so I
Yes.
do think that there's a lot of value, as you were saying, to making sure that we are getting our kids to therapists, particularly,
hmm
culturally responsive
hmm
therapists and
hmm
pediatricians and other care professionals who can evaluate a child and say, okay, this is what I suspect is going on with this
Sure.
child based on their history, based on all the things that you told me, based on what's happening with
Mm-hmm.
them right now. But to go a step further, I think that parents have to be okay with someone telling them that these are the things that have happened in this child's life that also have maybe triggered this
Yeah,
response or this behavior.
I
And
agree.
these are the things that I see as opportunities to turn things around so that your child can turn the corner. I think sometimes we get to a point, especially as parents, Black parents, we don't want anybody telling us how to raise our kids, and we're not
Right.
necessarily open to suggestions
That's
or
true.
the implication that I'm doing something wrong.
Right. Or, yes, challenging the fact that I'm doing the best I can.
Mm-hmm.
Is another issue. So we, as parents, may be already carrying a
Heavy
portion
load.
we're carrying a heavy load, but there may also be a portion of guilt
Mm-hmm.
because we wish that we could be doing more or doing
Right.
something differently, and for a plethora of reasons we're
Mm-hmm.
unable to, and then somebody coming in and saying, well, you should be, or why don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Those types of things are just adding pressure. Like, I want to, subconsciously or consciously, I want
I
to,
want to.
and I just can't.
And I think that that's why it's important for us to do this in community, right?
Yeah.
So when you have a culturally responsive care team, they
Hmm.
recognize that. They understand
Absolutely.
those challenges that our communities experience. They understand the limitations. They understand the lack of resources.
Yeah.
But I think collectively, if we work together, then we can identify ways that we can support families. Families can feel supported, and kids
Hmm.
can get the things that they need without being misdiagnosed, right?
Sure.
Without the stigma when they go to school, teachers and administrators knowing that they have this diagnosis and then
Right.
maybe treating them differently. And I think that we don't have those conversations enough. And that's exactly what our community needs.
Sure. I totally agree with you. We probably won't be talking about it, but most of our listeners are aware of the White House shooting, and there's someone going viral for continuing to eat his salad, and people stealing and doing all the things. They ain't our people, but people
Right.
doing, these hard behaviors when
Mhm.
allegedly they felt like their lives were threatened. And I started thinking about spending time with some of my cousins in urban neighborhoods and hearing gunshots and being afraid for my life. And they like, oh girl, we all right.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And so that desensitization of community trauma, of hearing police sirens.
Mhm.
I know some adults who can't live in the suburbs because they're used to the hustle
Noise.
and bustle
Mhm.
of an urban community, which is often inclusive of police sirens and
Mhm.
gunshots and all of these types of things. And so even to be able to say, if there's nothing that you can do about it right now, to express to your children, this is not normal, or this should
Mhm.
not be normal.
Mhm.
This is not how we're supposed to live. We're not supposed to be afraid to walk down the street. We're not supposed to be afraid that a bullet is going to come through our window. We shouldn't be afraid that when we hear something scratching that there's a rodent in the walls. Like, this is our
Mhm.
life, but this is not the quality of life that we should be wanting,
Mhm.
or thinking that it's okay, even though it is what it is. You know what I mean? And so those things need to be addressed as well. And so children in our community not only have these cultural, and of course, not all Black people, right? We have Black
Right.
people who live in the suburbs and who are wealthy,
Exactly.
who still have stressors and all of that. But I just want to bring to our attention that there are community stressors. I know I grew up in a white neighborhood, and once again, one of those stressors were being Black
Mhm.
in an all-white neighborhood. So,
Mhm.
there are still stressors.
Yeah.
Additionally, we have, not just regular bullying, but cyberbullying now. We have, this comparison culture where we always have had this notion of keeping up with the Joneses, but because social media is everything right now, to
Mhm.
always be comparing ourselves to others, not
Mhm.
just those who are earned wealthy, but those who are quote unquote influencers and on the
Mhm.
come up, always kind of, for lack of the word that I want to use, gaslighting us into thinking that everything is great all the time. And
Yeah.
it's not. And so that often can put pressure on our children as well as our own mental health. Um, and then we also have early exposure to trauma through social media. Back to the desensitization. We are seeing people killed. We are hearing about people being killed. And it's just another day in the life. And it shouldn't be.
And it shouldn't be.
And it shouldn't be.
I know this was one of my challenges when my kids were little was really just, taking the time to sit down and have the deep conversations with them
Hmm.
about their
Yeah.
day, what
Yes.
happened,
Open-ended questions. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And paying attention or knowing the things to pay attention to. So, like, if a child says something to us, it might have been minute, but to them, it could have been everything. It could have been the thing that
Yes.
ruined their
Yes.
entire day. So,
Yes.
just number one, having the time, taking the time, sitting down and really deeply listening to the things that our children are
Mhm.
telling us. And,
Mhm.
when you and I were younger, we did
Yes.
stuff in the living room. Like we watched TV in the
Correct.
living room together as a
Yes.
family. We did all these things together as a family. But now kids are in their bedrooms. As soon as they
That's
get
so
home from
true.
school, they're going straight to their bedrooms. They're disengaged from family. They're on social media. They're doing all these
Yes.
things. So it makes sense that kids feel more isolated. They feel more
Mhm.
disconnected. They feel more alone today than they did when you and I were
Yeah,
growing up.
absolutely.
So those are things that I think parents also need to pay attention to and try to
Mhm.
disrupt. Yeah, it might be easier to not have to fuss with your kid about making them come and hang out in the living room, do their homework in the living room or in the
Right.
kitchen in a
Right.
communal space as opposed to in their bedrooms. But long term, I think that there
Mhm.
are lots of benefits to doing so, including major benefits to your kids' mental health.
Absolutely. And doing, even simple things that you were just suggesting, but if it's not every night, having a weekly family dinner,
Mhm.
having mental health check-ins, normalizing, we don't keep secrets in this family.
Right.
Like we tell, because we really haven't talked about sexual trauma that also
Mhm.
affects behaviors and stressors for children. Culturally, we have traditionally said, what happens in our house stays in our house.
Mhm.
We don't talk about that. No, we need to dispel that myth as well and make it
Mhm.
okay. We tell. I don't care who it is. I don't
Mhm.
care if it's mommy, daddy, your sister. If something happens to you that you didn't like or that you
Mhm.
felt uncomfortable with, then you tell it, and we tell it out in the open. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so that puts predators on guard in whatever way, emotionally, sexually, financially, and it gives us freedom to be expressive. And as you alluded to earlier, even when our children sometimes tell us stuff we don't want to hear and we don't
Mhm.
like, but being
Mhm.
open to having those conversations, you hurt my
Yeah.
feelings instead of man up, toughen up,
Right.
those types of things.
Yeah. They make a difference. So some signs to watch for: big changes in your child's sleep, whether they're sleeping too
Mhm.
much or too little, changes in their appetite. You may see their grades start to slip or them wanting to avoid school. If they
Mhm.
become irritable, angry, they have frequent meltdowns, they're
Yes,
withdrawing from
bedwetting.
bedwetting, yes. If they're withdrawing from friends and family, they have stomach aches or headaches all the time, and there's no
Mhm.
clear reason for them to be having those headaches and stomach aches. That's a challenge. Also,
Yeah.
if you see your kid being engaged in a lot more risky behavior, that's
That's a
a
good one.
sign to watch for, right? And for your kid,
Yes,
risky behavior might look differently than someone else's kid, but
absolutely.
risky behavior is also another
Yeah.
sign.
Over sexualization.
Mhm. Yep,
Yeah, which is inclusive of risky behavior, but yeah.
for sure.
Absolutely. And, normalizing therapy. Like, you
Mhm.
know me, Jesus therapies and sometimes meds,
Mhm.
but they all work together. But, letting our children, letting the people in our family know it's a doctor just for your mind, and it's okay to have somebody that you just tell all the things to, even if
Mhm.
you don't feel comfortable telling all the things here. We want you to tell all the things here, but we may not ourselves have the tools and
That's
strategies to
right.
help you become a healthier individual. And so that is why God has placed therapists and counselors in our lives to help us navigate those difficult spaces.
Mhm. So yeah. So as a community, we have to support each other. So it starts with, making sure that you have a great care team, the therapist, the pediatrician, any
Mm-hmm.
groups that you get referred to, the school counselor or school-based mental health services, and your family, friends, and confidants, right? All of those
Yes.
people are part of your support group. But guess what? Your kids need those supports as well, right?
Yes.
So normalize it for them that they can talk to those individuals and get all the things out, because that just means that whatever the treatment plan is going to be that much stronger for your child.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And recognizing that creating healthy children, of course, creates healthy adults. And that's
Yes,
the goal of all of us as parents, right?
that is the case. Cool. All right. Well, let's transition to the herbal tea.
Uh-oh.
As you all know, the herbal tea segment is an opportunity for us to talk about what you all are gossiping about and offer up something beneficial to our collective well-being. We consider it healthier gossip. So T, what's on tap for today?
We try to make it healthy. We really, really do. Okay, so let's talk about up first Simone Biles. She's a Olympic gold medalist in gymnastics.
Mm-hmm.
And Simone Biles shared recently that she paid about $22,000 total to do a red carpet appearance, which included hair, makeup, and professional styling. And she was like, if this is normal, this ain't what I'm trying to do. And so the internet was, responded with mixed opinions. Some shocked, some saying it's standard for celebrity appearances. And I know Taraji P. Henson has talked about this before. I believe Mary J. Blige has talked about this before. So it's an ongoing conversation. And I think it happens not just with celebrities, but you and I.
Mm-hmm.
We have to add up before we going somewhere.
Right.
Hold on.
Right.
Hair,
Hair,
nails,
nails. Right.
makeup,
Mm-hmm.
new
Dress,
dress,
shoes.
shoes, handbag, time to get there, parking.
Right.
And so, what is reasonable expectation for anybody to spend on an evening out?
Mhm. Yeah. And I love the fact that Simone Biles is bringing this out again, because as you all know, she has been a huge advocate for prioritizing one's mental health. Sometimes we don't make the connection between mental health and finances, but
Yes,
there is a
great
direct
point.
connection, right? And so, as Simone is asking these questions, it forces us, as you said, with our events, like, okay, yeah, the ticket might have cost $60, but by the time you do all the things to prepare yourself for it,
Yeah,
it might be a $500 event now, right?
right,
And
right.
where is that in the budget? Did we budget for that?
Yes. Oh, that's a
Probably
good
not.
point.
And so I do feel like Simone bringing this this question up, allows us to start questioning whether we're living within our means as a
Ooh,
community.
that's a good question.
Mhm.
And I definitely want us to talk about, living within our means, but then sidebar back to what you were saying about finances and mental health. Also, right, and we've mentioned this before when we talk about fashion, who are we doing all of this for?
Mhm. Right.
Right. And so how that affects our mental health as well. If you're doing it for you, kudos, no problem, right? If anybody that knows me, it's my leader's house. I try and look the best version of me for that day I
Mhm.
could look. But, are we doing it to impress others? I went to a wedding on Sunday and my mother was like, what you wearing? And I told her, she was like, didn't you already take pictures in that dress a couple years ago? Yes. And I'm finna take some more. Like, we have this mentality that we cannot wear a dress more than one time. I'm
I'm
with
guilty.
Tiffany Haddish on this joint. Like, I'm going to get my money's worth out of this dress
Yes.
because how often do I get to wear a gown? Now, do I have more
Mhm.
than one of them? Yes, but I'm
Mhm.
going to get a few wears out of them before they just go in the back of the closet. I don't do nothing with them.
Right. So my husband is always asking me, like, do you really need to buy another dress? And I'm like, yes, because I've worn this dress in this city to an
Yeah.
event and I've taken pictures. And so, no, I can't wear this dress again. And he's like, really? He was like, you don't see men with 1,000 tuxedos
And
in
don't
their
get me
closet.
started on that.
But literally, it's like, okay, yeah, if I go to another city, I can wear the dress, right? But at the end of the day, is that reasonable? Is that the best use of our resources, our money. We're going to a formal event on Saturday, and I'm going to recycle a dress that I've
Okay, just
worn
because
in
we
the
had this
same
conversation.
city. Actually, no, I made this decision like a week ago. I was like, well, number one,
Okay.
because I don't have time, number one, to go shopping. And really, like, I'm really trying to practice what we're preaching. So, does it make sense to go and spend money on a brand new dress for this event? And so I think this also links back to a discussion that Keke Palmer had recently, right? Where she was talking about how she's all good with not driving the fanciest car just to say that she's got the fanciest car. She
Yeah.
says she lives below her means. So she's
Yeah,
good
which is
with
what we
paying
should be doing. Yeah.
$1,500 in rent and riding a
Mhm.
Lexus or whatever.
And additionally, like, you even have people like Bill Gates, and they driving
Exactly.
affordable vehicles.
Exactly. And that's the cultural difference, right? The people
Yeah.
who
Oh,
got money
yes.
in white communities, they
Mhm.
not trying to flex,
Mhm.
right? You can see them, they look so
Mhm.
regular, they drive regular
Mhm.
cars. Now their
Right.
house might be nice,
Right.
right? But that's also something that appreciates. A house
Yes.
appreciates, a car does
Yeah.
not, right? So,
Sure.
they are using their money and their wealth to their advantage. Whereas in our communities, we're so excited about making it that we have to
Yeah.
show everyone that we've made it, if you
That we've
will,
made it, that we've arrived.
that
And
we've arrived.
part of that culturally, now let's be real, we're gonna talk about it. Part of it culturally is because if you grew up not having much, or if you grew up
Yes.
in a sense of lack,
Mhm.
then you feel the need to, for lack of a better word, splurge, or to
Right.
show people, like, to be like, look, mama, I made it.
Mhm.
So some of it is about comfortability, and some of it is about, well, we never could and now we
Mhm.
can. But back to what you were saying about, how finances impact mental health, living below your means also takes that stress off of living
Mhm.
paycheck to paycheck. Or
Right.
if a crisis hits, an emergency, a health emergency, right?
Mhm.
Because the reality of it is, no matter how much we have, unless you're in the $1 billion sphere, life be lifing, as the kids say, and
Tell me about
a
it.
setback can happen. And so I think in especially when Keke Palmer is making a statement like this, Keke Palmer has also been very vocal about taking care of her entire family since she was a
Mhm.
child financially. And
Mhm.
so we do see the tragic tales of an MC Hammer and
Mhm.
others, who have supported their entire families, and then something happens to them, fame goes away, they're no longer
Right.
working. God forbid you or I get hurt,
Mhm.
have a health crisis, then our entire family is back where we came from. And
Mhm.
so living below the means takes that added pressure off of you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I think that there's a lot to learn from Simone with this question. I think Keke Palmer's position in terms of living below her means are things that we as a community need to also start challenging ourselves to do. I think the real flex in this situation is peace of mind,
Peace of mind.
right? The knowledge that you have money in the bank should something happen. We're in a space right now where people are getting laid off left and right. People who've been
Mhm.
comfortable in their jobs, they got,
Yeah,
they thought they were going to retire from their jobs. They got nice houses and mortgages, and now they're finding themselves unemployed and not knowing what the future holds for them. So you never know
absolutely.
what might happen. And so being prepared by making sure that you built up an emergency fund, talking about money with trusted people, but just
Mhm.
doing things differently. Those are all things that I think we all could benefit from.
Absolutely. All right. The other portion of the tea that is TT that everybody has been talking about throughout the internet, and it feels like the story that just won't stop, is
Right.
the breakup of Megan Thee Stallion
Mhm.
and basketball player Klay Thompson. Part of the narrative is that Klay Thompson cheated on her. That's what Megan Thee Stallion is saying. She basically is saying, like, I was doing all of these things for you, for your family, and this disrespect is non-negotiable for me. Great for her. We all are standing in applause for Megan Thee Stallion. The side thought that I had was, I had a girlfriend one time tell me, I will not allow a man to make me his wife while he's still my boyfriend. And so that also brings
Mm.
into another conversation about how women are often overdoing, trying to prove that we wifey material when we're not. And
Mm.
that doesn't mean that men don't cheat, even when we're married. But
Mm-hmm.
just a sidebar. Also, there has become this debate about her body count, all the men that she's dated beforehand, if it's her fault that they keep cheating, if it's her fault that she can't keep a man, which is something that nobody is talking about Klay Thompson. But when we do talk about Klay Thompson, we're hearing about one, him cheating, and two, as Darren Fleet said, light-skinned men are getting a bad rap again. We used to think light-skinned men, the 90s had us thinking light-skinned men didn't cheat. And damn it, Clay, you and Drake is messing it up for the whole team. All right. Yep.
Number one, you can't make anybody do something. So if Klay
Right.
Thompson's going to cheat, Klay Thompson's going to cheat. And it's his responsibility not to cheat. It's not Megan's. So
Absolutely.
regardless of what she does, he has made a choice to cheat. And that is totally on him.
Right.
Now,
Because they could have broke up.
He could have broken up with her, but it seemed like he had her around his family, going to family functions and very public and out with her. Why would you do that?
Absolutely.
I don't think it matters what Megan's body count is. At the end of the day,
Not
she's a
at
grown
all.
woman. And so, like, if we were to ask Klay Thompson what his body count was, what would it be?
Right.
I mean, let's just be real. Like, so why is that even a conversation?
And, this goes back to the, and we've talked about this before, the victimization and blame on women, especially Black women, about things that are not pertaining specifically to this incident. But like you said, why does it matter?
Doesn't matter.
Especially in this hypersexualized culture. Why do
Mhm.
we keep labeling women as whatever we want to label them when they're taking agency of their bodies and their lives?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. One of the things I don't appreciate is these other celebrities are weighing in and talking about you should be shutting down these rumor affairs. Someone, anytime you have a public breakup, I think is traumatic. Then you shame the people who are involved in the breakup instead of allowing them to grieve their relationship. Like, I need y'all to sit down, have several seats.
Yeah, we are too, not we, you and I, but we as a culture are too invested in people's personal relationships. Like half of our relationships is on a rocky road.
Seriously. Yeah. So if we were to unpack what y'all going through in your relationships, yeah.
So the other thing that has been coming up is now there seems to be this trend starting of cheat girl summer. That's what we doing now. We like, oh, people are saying, oh, let's cheat first or let's cheat so that the men can get a taste of what we've been going through. That is not healthy mental, sexual, physical health. Like,
Right.
don't become a part of that trend. That's I'm gonna just call it what it is. That's stupid.
It's
Don't do
stupid.
that.
That's exactly what I was about to say. That's stupid. You beat me to it.
There's no way for me to be polite about it. It's just a stupid trend. What are y'all talking about?
And then at the end of the day, why, right? Isn't the whole point of being in a relationship to be in relationship? And so how
Yes.
does cheating further your relationship goals?
How does it? Absolutely.
But on a positive note, one of the things that I think is really important to highlight is the overwhelming support that Megan Thee Stallion has been receiving from so many people. I remember reading yesterday that, she's doing Moulin Rouge, right? And
She stopped. She stepped away. Like she's not doing any more shows.
Right.
Which goes back to the trauma and the grief of you're saying a relationship. But yeah, she stopped.
Exactly. We, I think, have to get to a point where we recognize that we need to take a break.
Good
Even if
point.
we're dealing with relationship stuff, right? Sometimes we have become so accustomed to just pushing through, but sometimes we have to step back and say, in this moment, I need to do what's best for me.
I like that perspective.
Yeah. And so, hey, someone had to remind me last week, no is a complete sentence.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. And so being more empowered to say no, being empowered to say, I'm going to take a break from all of these things that are adding additional pressure to me, especially as I'm going through this very difficult time in my life. It's okay. And more of us need to be willing to do that.
I love that. And that's what we're about here. And I had not thought of it from that perspective. Yesterday I heard Sherry say, like, don't let no man stop you from getting your coins. But we've talked about this before. Take your personal days, take your mental health day, all the things. And self-care is never on anybody else's agenda, but it better be on yours. And so I totally support and thank you for bringing it back full circle. She got to do what's best for her. We're
And
always going to be able to find a way to make money.
Right.
And, we need to take time to grieve and acknowledge our grief. and work through it and heal, because if we don't, then we end up hurting somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Good point. All right, good talk.
Good talk. Great show, Dr. Ebony. I like it.
Yes.
You put out a pretty decent product.
Girl, please. This is a collaborative effort, so I couldn't do any of this without you. And I think for real, you probably did most of the legwork this week. So kudos to you, sis.
Never. All right, fam. We thank you so much for your support, for your continued listenership, and for your questions, comments, concerns. We always invite you to email them, text us, or I don't know, gerrymander us at
at podcast@enjoylifemoreabundantly.com.
Thank you so much. People are still asking about our Life More Abundantly After Dark. We are going to do it, but what's the criteria, Ebony?
Reach 100 subscribers. Doesn't matter what
100
platform.
subscribers.
Just
There
100
you go.
subscribers.
Across the platforms, we're tracking our numbers. Some people are like, oh, I subscribe, but I still don't know when the podcasts come out. You also have to turn on the notifications. So please and thank you. Do that.
Please and thank you.
All right. Well, until next time.
Enjoy life.
And life more abundantly.
Cheers.
Can I go back?